name is Jacquard. I'm the curator here. I've been in Salina for 3 months. As of this Friday, I've been here for 3 months, and I've had some wonderful experiences thus far. This show was originally created by Gretchen Boyum and worked on by Ruth Morris, and I've taken it over. And it's contemporary textile, the show that's part of this Lunch and Learn. So as you probably already know, we do a Lunch and Learn here at Salina Arts Center every third Wednesday. And today we have the wonderful opportunity to talk to our local community and bring in quilting. So one of the things that I brought into the show, which is contemporary textiles, was Misty and I both, Misty's curator director, and I both talked about how assessing the local community also became quilting, but also the fact that quilting is part of the dialogue of fiber arts. So we wouldn't really have such a robust discussion, post 20th century fiber arts if it weren't for the quilters. Quilting is part of, I'm going to go through some slides very quickly and talk about the history of quilting as I get into that right now. And then I'll introduce the speakers and we'll have a robust discussion. What is quilting? Quilting is essentially, base of quilting is 2 layers of fabric with some kind of batting in between, which is stitched, both hand and machine stitched. All the quilts that are in our show are machine stitched. So I know Liddell is going to talk a little bit about that today. This is the first known quilt. So 14th century Sicily, the Normans occupied Sicily, and this is a story of Tristan and Isolde, who Tristan was a knight and had an adulterous affair with the Princess of Scotland. Irish Princess Isolde. And there's many different names for Tristan and Isolde, but I'm sticking with Tristan and Isolde because there's an opera and a ballet after them, so but they finally escaped to the wilderness and got married and were able to elope and finish their love. But this is the quilt that talks about that story. Here's a little detail of one of these quilts. It's called trapunto. The technique is, are you familiar with this technique? Okay, trapunto is the experts here, right? Obviously. By inserting rolls of cotton into raised section of the design. So this is in the collection of the Victorian Albert Museum in London. So this quilt actually. Then we have Harriet Powers, who is a self-taught artist, but also an emancipated slave. She worked most of the 18th century. She died in the early part of the 19th century. There's only 2 quilts of hers. I'm just going to quickly go over a couple panels real fast. The first row on the top right here. This is Job praying for his enemies. So they're both biblical and celestial happenings. And the second row, this one right here was important 3 years before her birth. In 1833, there was a meteor shower, and a lot of people thought that in the South thought that the world was coming to an end. So she marked this by that, and then finally, there's a lot of Noah's Ark, and the creation of animals continues, and that's right here. So both celestial and biblical, and Harriet Powers was educated through this. Our Red Cross benefit quilt, this is from Virginia, and there's 785 names here to help fundraise for World War I in response to Woodrow Wilson's Every American Needs to Get Involved, to do something. This is the Names Project, and of course there's hundreds of quilts, right, important quilts. These are just a few historic moments. The AIDS Memorial Quilt, which was started in 1987, which was, sorry, I just want to get the dates right. They're not here, but that's fine. By 2016, this is the National Mall in DC, and the quilt spans over 1.2 million square feet, so it's quite enormous. And yeah, and it's over 100,000 names. Anyway, I guess I don't have my notes after all, right? This is Gee's Bend, which is a rural community in Alabama. And the interesting thing is, it's and we have had discussions about this. This is a group of 20th century quilters. But the interesting thing about Gee's Bend, it was named after the slave owner that owned the plantation, which was a normal custom in the 19th century. But the government actually allowed for a lot of African American peoples to own private property by tracts of land at that time. So actually the Gee's Bend area was actually owned for part of the 20th century, which, they escaped the Jim Crow sort of, hole, if you will, or that issue we had with allowing to own property. And the quilts have been shown in many museum exhibitions. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit, we've got a quilting bee here right now. We're not going to quilt today, but we've got a quilting bee here. So before I introduce our speakers, just very quickly, Faith Reingold is a living artist still living with us who often uses quilts and writes wonderful children's books. So if you have grandchildren or children, we encourage you to look at her books. This is actually not a quilt, but it's a quilting bee. And these are some, this is Madame Walker, Sojourner Truth, from left to right, Ida Wells, Fannie Lou Hammer, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Marion McLeod Bethune, and Ella Baker. And then on the right, it's not Van Gogh, but it's a stand-in, it's a fictional character that she created. So,
with sunflowers, like Van Gogh?
Yeah, so this is called Quilting Bee at Arles. So Arles is a French town where a lot of Impressionism and Post-Impressionist painters worked. So this was her nod to that community. So, without much further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our panelists. And they sat alphabetically as well. So, stitches are regular, quilters follow the rhythm of the fabric, so that's great. So Sean Delker, we have Liddell Ediger, and we have Catherine Kearney. They're all Salina-based quilters and artists. Sean Delker, they're all three in our contemporary textile show, and we're all going to have a rich discussion. I have some images up. They actually also brought quilts graciously. So we're going to talk about that. Yes, there's social distancing in place, but please, you're welcome to come up and look at this. And I'm going to go through some slides, but feel free to, we've got some wonderful moments here, some wonderful to talk about. I'm going to start with Sean Delker, and as images up, you're welcome to talk about what you brought.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay with the mask on? Okay. I will try. And if you can't, raise your hand and I'll pull off the mask and hopefully you'll be able to hear. I am Sean Delker. I used to do traditional quilts like are showing up here. And that's my very first one that I ever did. It's all hand pieced. And so I sat there and stitched on it when my son, who's now in his 40s, was a baby. So that one was stitched out of old pieces of shirts and leftover pieces of fabric. And so that was where that one was, and it's called a Boston comic quilt. And I put prairie points all the way around the edge. And yes, it's made out of polyester. It's not cotton. So I was following the rules at that time. And this one is one of my later quilts. I finished that 2 or 3 years ago. And I call it my second chances quilt. And because I practice so much and do so many pieces of quilt, I have a lot of failures. But people don't believe that I have lots and lots of failure quilts, or even ones that I wanted to see if this worked, and it doesn't. And then I have this, and I don't really want to throw it in the trash. So I cut up my failure quilts into 3-inch squares, 2-inch squares, and 1-inch squares, stacked them up, and hand-stitched around each one using the buttonhole stitch around each one, and then stuck it on a piece of fabric and stitched between each one, and I had that hanging up in my hallway of my home to remind me that we all need second chances. And so I gave those quilts a second chance. So, and I enjoy doing stuff like that. I'm working on my next one that's all circles instead of squares. So I enjoy doing things like that.
Great, thanks to the next one.
Oh, thank you.
And right, it's
Okay,
called cabin.
yeah, both of these are mine, and both of them are log cabins. I chose the log cabin to show what a wonderful, versatile pattern a log cabin quilt is. I've even seen them done wonky, which is really fun to look at too. But these are traditional log cabin quilts that they are so very different depending on how you set up the pattern. They're very, very different. The colors are very, very different. The blue one sits in a bedroom, is on a bed in the bedroom where my children, when they come visit, and use that on that particular bed. So it's my guest bedroom. And the red one is much smaller than that, and it hangs on the back of one of my chairs at times. So, but now I am no longer doing very much of the traditional quilting. I find that the confines of little squares and matching points just isn't for me. Although I enjoy doing it and I know what to do and I know the tricks, some of them, I don't know all of them. I know a lot of the tricks. I'm even qualified to judge quilts at fairs and stuff, but I really don't like doing it because I feel like I'm a member of that quilt police that many of you have heard about. And so I have moved on to doing art quilts, and this is more like what I am doing now. I have no points to match, and I've been doing, this is eco-printed, I enjoy, or sometimes called botanical printing, and then a piece of silk on the back to be the moon, and then I thread painted the bird. And thread painting is when it's just like taking watercolor paints. In fact, I've been taking watercolor paint classes to learn more about how to shade and that sort of thing. So that's what I've been doing and working on recently with my art. I just love doing it, and I have a lot of fun with it. Sometimes the thread painting does get tedious because I'm at the sewing machine just sitting and making tiny little movements to do that. So it does take a lot of time. But I wanted to tell one story about why I don't like being the quilt police, and maybe I hope I don't step on any toes from somebody else that's in the quilt police, but because there's a lot of them out there that believe this has got to be exact. And one time I was teaching a class to a young lady, to a group of young ladies that were much younger than me. And they were, one lady said, I have a quilt. It is beautiful. She was very emphatic about it. So in my mind, I envisioned something like what you guys have made in the past, or some of my quilts that I've made that I think are quite nice. And then she brought it to the next session of the class. And it was the most gosh-awful ugly thing you ever saw in your entire life. I am not kidding. Her mother and her grandmother had taken a blanket, threw a sheet on top of it flat. I don't know how they had put it together. It was an old blanket, crummy old blanket, you know, with the pills on it and everything. A sheet, an old sheet that had been used over and over again, and they had that kind of funny smell to them when they'd been stored too long. Then they had taken overalls and shirts and just plastered on with a big zigzag stitch all the way around each piece of clothing. And I thought, oh my word, this wouldn't even pass for a quilt at the fair. You can't take this to the fair. They'd even go, they'd even go, no, no. Well, but she kept telling me, isn't this beautiful? And I'm going, uh-huh. And I have this smile on my face like, a doubtful look. And then she spread it all out and said, see, these overalls were my daddy's overalls. And I remember my dad, when I look at them, and look, they left the pocket so I can put secret things in it. And look, this little onesie belonged to my niece. She's all grown out of it now, but I like to remember it. Look, this is my grandma's old house dress. She used to wear around the house all the time. And it has a pocket and I can stick things in it. And she taught me a big lesson that day that I don't even really like judging quilts anymore because every quilt has something special about them. I didn't like it. I wouldn't want it on my bed, but she will have it on her bed for the rest of her life, I'm sure, because of what it meant to her. It was grandma's dress and daddy's overalls and niece's clothes. And it was special to her. So I wanted to leave you with that I just feel like that these quilts in here are beautiful. They're awesome. But sometimes it's in the eye of the beholder.
And actually, just as one last slide of Sean's work.
Oh,
This is a pinwheel, and correct me if I'm wrong, and a bow tie.
yes, that's a pinwheel.
And if you look at them, actually, I'm new to the quilting, education of quilting, which is governed by these three lovely people here in Gene Hamilton. And it's wonderful to learn so much about these. But you can actually see on the right, the bow tie. You can actually see a bow tie.
Yep. Yeah. I brushed those very, very quickly out, and they're all machine quilted and machine pieced. But I machine quilted them myself. I didn't send it out to somebody else.
And next we have some images of some of the Dell editors, and also right here.
I'd like to start with this one because I pulled this out of my, I had to find it this morning, and I was a little nervous about finding it. I want to talk about quilting and community because this quilt represents community to me. Years ago, I was in a group that met religiously monthly. There were 12 of us, and all ages. And we would come together on a Monday night, and we would laugh, and we'd always have something to eat, but we'd always have handwork that we would do and quilting that we would, have available. They knew about my children. I knew about theirs. I knew about their grandchildren. It was a community, and again, getting back to, quilting bees, that's what that was. It was building community. We decided that we were all going to make 4 patches. So 4 patches is 2 colored fabrics, and then usually 2 offsetting, either muslin or something. So we each made what seemed like hundreds of 4 patches, because each of us then gave the other 11 probably a stack of a dozen, and then I got other 4 patches from my friends. So this quilt represents my community of friends. Now I have to tell you, some of these ladies are no longer here, but I remember them, and they were very special in my life. And so quilting, and I also said early on, this is the one and only quilt that I have hand quilted, and it will remain the only hand quilted quilt that I have made. So again, and it probably took me about 15 years to get it quilted. So, but it's very special. And again, it just shows how much community gatherings. In fact, Catherine and I went to Sisters, Oregon several years ago. And the G's Ben's women were there.
And they sang.
And they sang, and it was amazing. They showed their quilts, and it was an amazing experience. But again, we were about 15 women or so from north central Kansas that went
Was it
to,
all there?
huh?
I thought it was a whole bus full, but
Well,
was it all?
or so.
Yeah.
So,
I put it back on that quickly. Did you see
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
That's a 9 patch, actually. Right?
in the center is a 9-patch, yes.
It's got piecing to it.
The rest of it come more like a real fence.
So I actually do a lot of hand piecing in terms of applique, and this is with wool. And I tell you what, this is all cotton, and it feels very different than the green quilt because it has well, I don't know how to explain how wool feels. It isn't a wool jacket, but it is a textured piece of fabric. And so it's easy then to applique wool because it is a little more dense than what cotton is.
And it's felted wool.
It is felted wool, yeah. So it just, and it's so comforting to sit and stitch it. And I use a blanket stitch mostly to put it down. And then I can do some embroidery to make it kind of pop. The first quilt there I made in honor of a good friend that just passed away, and she had an art show in her memory. And that quilt is special because I call it intersecting lives, because this woman and I had young children the same age. We met at a YWCA that brought people together. Our husbands were both in the either the architectural or the contractor business, and so we had numerous ways. Our children, our social life at a YWCA, and then our husbands. So I really felt like we intersected in a variety of ways. The pink and brown quilt, again, I still am in the, I don't judge people's quilts though, but I really love machine piecing. And so I do a lot of that now. I probably spend anywhere from 3 to 4 hours a day sewing and piecing. And so it fills my spirit with, it's my artistic outlet. I can, again, I can start something and go, oh, that did not work, and just throw it over my shoulder and start something else. So I believe that, well, and then I believe quilts also then keep you warm. And so it's a nice way to think about these things will last. And so I'll hand them down, or they'll go to my grandkids or whatever. So I think that's about enough that I have to say. Oh, and then a fun watermelon quilt, again, pieced and a little applique. So just a few quilts to show you what I do.
Is that actually called a watermelon pattern?
That is a actually the center is, oh goodness.
Snowball.
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 Snowball. The pink and brown on the corner is, again, all cotton. And I was doing just a little research. The pink and brown quilts came into vogue in the early 1800s. And so there's a lot of history using pink and brown together, which some people would say, ooh, it's kind of unusual. And that's not a great photo, but I do love pink and brown. So, Catherine. I think I'm good. Yeah.
Thank you. We have Catherine.
Yes, I am Catherine Kearney, and to me, quilting has a lot to do with color. I love color, and I love playing with color. And so it's amazing the things that you can do when you are just playing with color. The quilt that's on the right, it's better if you can even see the back. That's called mirror manipulation, and it's taking a particular motif within a fabric and repeating it. You cut the very same motif, so you end up with a piece of fabric that looks like Swiss cheese because you're just cutting out parts. And then when you put it together, you get a kaleidoscope effect. That kind of morphed into something that was called stack and whack because you could lay them in layers and cut it all at once. But stack and whack, you can't control the design that you want. Whereas with mirror manipulation, you can actually select the exact motif that you want to cut. And so I did a bunch of those. I love playing with color and fabric designs. And the other one is just simply what you can do when you make the same block and you just keep putting it together and how you can make a really strange, interesting look. The one that's, I don't remember what you have next. The one that's on the left was another one where you're playing with color and it's simply a piece of fabric behind and then black on top, and you can move it by, they're three-dimensional, so you can move it. And it's a color thing. Again, it's color. I have a thing about it. The one that's, this is just a large piece of the one that's in this gallery. That quilt, I had more fun making that than I can say, because I went through all of my drawers of scraps and kept pulling things out and auditioning different fabrics with different fabrics. And then the secondary pattern that shows up, because it's just simply there's three different blocks in that, and the way you put it together, you get this secondary pattern, which again is about color and pattern. And that's the part that I like about quilting, and I just have so much fun with that. And one of the things I have learned, and Sean is absolutely right, I have learned in my business, I have a business called Quilting Station, and I do machine quilting for other people. Everybody has different likes and dislikes, but I learned early on I never say anything critical about their quilts. I always give them positive feedback. At the end, if there's been an issue, one of the biggest issues that people have is they don't measure for their borders, they just sew them on. And then the borders are quite big for the center of the quilt. And I will say, if you want to have a better finished product next time, you might consider, and I try to give them positive feedback. But I have had several people who have brought in quilts that I wasn't sure I was going to even be able to quilt them because they were so wonky and that I didn't know if I could get them flat. And I just always told them I'll do the best I can, but you realize that we have these issues and I'll just do the best that I can because I know this is a special quilt to you. So it's a good lesson to be aware that everybody has different likes. And although I like points to come to a point, they don't have to. And the next one, I forget what you brought, what I did. The one on the left is this quilt. And the thing that is the neatest about this quilt, there's only 2 different fabrics in the whole quilt. But in the last, 2 or 3 years, we've come up with ombre fabrics. Is that about how long?
Probably seems
And ombre shades from light to dark. And generally, it's dark on the selvage edges and lighter in the center. And by putting it together into a circle and then just following the cutting instructions, you can do amazing things. This is a Bargello quilt. Bargello quilts are simply, you put it, make a circle, and then you cut strips, and you put it together. It's easy to do. It sounds complicated, but it's easy to do. So it's just amazing, again, what you can do with color and fabric.
Disagree.
Oh, I love Bargellos. Oh, sorry, I got my bottle. The other one is, again, playing with my scraps and putting color together, and that picture doesn't do justice to the color, but that's the way life is. One of the things that I brought, if you're interested in quilt blocks and designs, this book, Carrie Hall Blocks, this one, there's over 800 Patina Havoc, and I don't even know if either of these are still available, but I think they might have this one in the library. This is one from the 1970s. It's kind of when I began getting interested in quilting. And it has a number of block patterns and designs in it too. And I use these as reference tools. I have more pattern books than I know what to do with, but I still go to these. So I brought those along in case anybody would be interested in looking at those. And I would ask if you have questions for the three of us.
Definitely.
Is Kansas a big quilting state?
Yes, but I don't think it's any bigger than anywhere else. What do you think?
You know, wherever I travel, there's lots of quilters and lots of quilt guilds.
And there are quilt shops
That's
everywhere.
where I was gonna go.
Except here
But
in
the
Salina.
thing that is really shocking, and they'll agree with me, you can go to even a different town here. You can go to Abilene or you can go to Minneapolis and go into those shops and they're totally different.
Yep.
Different attitude about their color choices, whether they're focusing on one type of fabric or not. And then if you go to Colorado, they're really more into art quilting. In my area of Colorado, it's not traditional quilting at all. So, and then another area, it's all dark fabrics, and you go somewhere else and it's all beach fabrics, and so it's not any more here than anywhere else. What do you guys think?
I agree.
Yeah, I do.
Just different.
Just different.
But I do miss the quilt shop in Salina.
Yeah, I had a question for Liddell. I've not worked with wool at all. When you applique, do you turn under or is it
No.
raw?
It's just like
It's
it's
velvet,
stitched.
so it doesn't,
Exactly. It's lovely to work with, and that blanket stitch is easy to do. And then, add whatever embroidery you want afterwards. So I do a lot of the wool work in the winter because again, it's so comforting and warm, and it's easy to do.
do you buy it felted or do you
Yes, I
do it
do.
yourself?
No, I don't.
Are you all aware what felted wool is? In case not, it's wool that has been shrunk to within an inch of its life. I mean, if you buy a piece of wool, then you wash it in as hot a water as you can wash it in, and you put it in the dryer on as high a heat as you can possibly do it, and it draws it all together, and it doesn't ravel.
No, it doesn't.
No. Sometimes it's called boiled wool.
Yes.
Yes.
Sean, have you done any of the Kalandi or CD quilts? I've been researching this, and it is this Margaret, starts with F. She went to India, and in India, during the 16th, 17th century, black slaves were brought into India, and they didn't have very much material, so they used saris and made blankets for the monsoon season. And so they would hand stitch scraps with a hand stitch. And so I've been looking at this on Pinterest, so I made me a couple in the last 2 weeks.
Oh, cool.
And so you use a large thread, and you just take scraps out of your scrap bag and start, you put your layer of your background material, your batting, and then you start adding from the outside in and hand stitch this in. And so research it, because it is also called slow stitching, where
Is it-
you meditate kind of when you
What's
do
it
the
called
stitching.
again?
Or CD, SIDDI, or Kalandi, KWANDI. So with the COVID, I've just been like sitting in my recliner, and a scrap bag fixed to me, and then just grab and set and stitch. And but it's a lot of hand and pushing that needle through. But this lady that went to do, she would go to India and research and bring these back, and then they would have shows about them. So it's very interesting. You might check it out.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I've heard about
Kalandi,
stitch.
Kantha,
Yeah.
Kantha.
fabric with little tiny stitches across in
Right,
rows.
and then the Japanese have like.
And they have Boro, and I've done that.
Or the S, yeah,
Yeah, and then there's more exact ones
right.
that's got a different name.
So anyway, so if it's wonky, or you've got a thread or a knot, and it's crooked, and it's art.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
How many makers do we have here, by the way, in the audience?
Yeah.
Are you all makers? Okay, and thank you. Did you have a question? Also, I need to raise your hand for the makers.
Yeah, so far, the only quilting I've been able to do when I'm finishing a piece is straight lines, you know, and I would love to be able to do more, like, how do you do that without having a machine that you can, like, program it into, to do, you know?
Well, what I do to do the curvy lines on here is I lower the feed dogs on my sewing machine and then practice a lot over and over again with my sewing machine. And the thread painting is basically the same thing, lower the feed dogs and practice a lot and putting a design on a piece of fabric. But it's basically lower the feed dogs and you're guiding it.
And
Do
your
you,
bag is.
do you put your needle in dark position so that your foot feed does not go, the
Yeah.
press foot doesn't go?
Right, the
And
press
put it
foot
into the
doesn't.
dark position, and then your press foot does not touch the fabric.
Mhm.
So you're totally
And I
controlled.
use-
Oh, so you're just like.
I use my darning foot, I should have gone, I use a darning foot, and I usually, for this kind of thing, I do an 80 needle, but if I'm doing the Raven, I'll do a 90 needle, and I like to use, blank, I like to use embroidery threads that are on a spool, the shiny stuff, you can buy the poly trifold. And I use it, you need to have a really good thread, especially when you're doing the thread painting or it shreds. And so I use superior threads, but others probably work just as well. But I have not had any luck with the ones you can buy in Joann's, the Suki. I don't have much luck with that. So they shred, and I just like, I don't have the patience to deal with this. But on him, I do my thread painting on a separate piece of fabric. I do it different than anybody else, I think. But I make a separate piece, and I have a layer of felt, a layer of buckram, which is an interfacing for making pleated drapes that nobody makes anymore. And thank goodness. And then a layer of fabric that's similar in color to the general color design. I put in a 90 needle, lower those feed dogs, put on my embroidery foot, and then I start drawing. And I've been learning about art and color and shading with colors from taking watercolor classes. So that's how I've been learning to do this. It's just basically trial and error.
I can see doing that on a small piece, but when you've got your, like,
That is
rolling
really,
up the quilt and trying to.
When you're doing a big quilt and you want to do free motion quilting on it, go ahead and set your lines vertical and horizontal just in big sections, and then concentrate on just a section of the quilt. And you just work on
Right.
one section. But by setting some verticals and horizontals, you can work those into your pattern pretty well, but that holds the pieces together and you're not.
Nice.
And then the other secret is to pin, 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 pin. And when I was doing, well, I still do some things on my domestic machine, but you pin about every 4 inches, little safety pins. And so you have a whole box full of safety pins, and you end up putting all those on.
Does it make sense to start that quilting like in the middle, or do you work on the outside?
I always worked it, I don't know about when Linda was doing hers, but I always roll to the center, set my center, and then work center to one side, and then turn my quilt work center to the side. Because you can only get about half of it rolled under the arm of your machine anyway. And if you have a really big quilt, put a table on the other side of your sewing machine. So the weight goes onto that table. It's not dropping down and pulling on the weight on your shoulder, because the other part, goes up over your shoulder.
And it's heavy.
It's
I'll
heavy.
just bring it to you at that point.
You are welcome, Sarah, to bring it to me.
I think most people choose to do that just because it isn't easy to do it on your domestic.
But it can be done, and I've seen beautiful
Oh,
quilts done on a
definitely,
domestic machine.
definitely, yes.
Beautiful quilts. So there's not a reason you couldn't do it. Now you and Ann have a machine now, don't
We do.
Woo.
Yeah,
Oh,
you? Because I look back here, I recognize them.
yeah, yeah. There you go.
What other questions? Ellie?
I just want to know, do you, when you're planning your quilt out, do you like to sketch? Do you get colored pencils or do it on paper, or do you plan in advance that way, like our artist sketches?
For me, I just have a design wall and I have this idea in my head and I just try until I like it. Sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong. But that's how I do it.
Yeah.
I'm one of the quilters that design it all out in graph paper.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm more spontaneous. I do like, I have a design wall, and it, I can slap things up there and say, oh, that's not gonna work, and,
And I'm the same.
And you're the same, and you don't use the computer either, like a computer design program?
Now, if I had a decent computer and I was literate in computer use, I probably would, but no.
So what's on the surface of the wall?
Felt.
Felt.
Felt, and then.
Or flannel. Mine is a flannel sheet that I have wrapped around the board, and it's the height of a wall, but flannel. And then I have another one in my house in Estes Park, and it's the backside of a plastic tablecloth, and it's
Yep.
and I just have it tacked to the wall, and
And then the fabric will just sort of stick to that.
the fabric sticks to it.
And do you ever take pictures of it with your phones?
all the time.
Side by side, so then it is, you have a way to work through
The
it.
other part about taking pictures with your phone is if you get your blocks all done and you have them arranged, take a picture of it with your phone, and then you can see if you have one block turned the wrong way, because it'll show up in that little picture, but you won't see it on the wall.
So it's a mix of old school and technology.
Yep.
It's a great question. I'm curious, actually, myself, how you feel about people, you said your family comes and uses the guest bedroom the quilts. Does that mean they actually sleep with the quilt?
Oh, yeah.
Always.
Y'all comfortable with that?
Oh, yeah. The only thing that bothers me the most is when they take them and use it for the dogs or cats. That kind of bothers me. But my cat sleeps on my quilts all the time, so. But yes, quilts are meant to be used.
Yeah, actually, speaking of usefulness factor, one of our panelists actually was featured in 1989 in Bloomingdale's on Lexington and 3rd in New York. Not online, this is pre-digital, it's actually the physical headquarters of Bloomingdale's, if it's still in business. I think it is. Anyway, what kind of experience did you have with that? Because we never really talked about it, you mentioned it to me, and I was fascinated by that because, when you're on this national stage, right, of that effect, did you actually go there and see the...
No, I didn't. That was when I was in my phase of just doing miniatures. And so I wouldn't have taken a quilt this size and let them have it at Bloomingdale's because it would be cost prohibitive to ship 20 of these and then not know whether you're going to sell any. So I probably sent about 15 or 20 miniature quilts to Bloomingdale's and just hoped for the best. And I did sell some. So it was kind of an experiment of whether metropolitan folks would know what a quilt was. And so I just gave it a try. So, but I moved past that. I don't do that anymore.
And as Catherine teaches a quilting station here, and Sean teaches, obviously, and does thread painting. In fact, the exhibit here, which if we have a few minutes, maybe we can walk around in near the end and show the works of these lovely, talented panelists here. Do we have any more questions, though?
I have more of a comment that when you were describing how the quilts should be used and also just the comfort of them, Sean, when you were talking about the special things that were in that woman's quilt that were so meaningful, and then we were talking about art and quilting and community. And it reminded me of the AIDS quilt project. It was just so phenomenal that brought people together from, when you showed it earlier. I mean, what a beautiful thing. And I just love that so many people got involved in expressing their love through quilting. And what a healing activity that was for the entire nation. You know, it was pretty phenomenal.
There's over 100,000 names in here, and it was a pandemic actually at that time. The AIDS pandemic.
Yeah.
Were you able to see, going back very quickly, if you had any communication with anybody that got your quote? That was also something I want to follow with you.
I had I don't even remember what they were. It was a couple, a man and wife, that kind of shepherded the quilts through the process. And so, but I didn't go. So,
Okay, I was curious.
so they were there in New York and helped to arrange them and do that sort of stuff.
Because someone over here asked about quilting in Kansas, right, and how popular it is. And I come from grandmothers who quilted, and in South Carolina and Georgia. I'm from Florida, but I thought quilting was a southern thing growing up. And then to learn that it's quite pervasive throughout the world, obviously. And quilting's early roots prior to the bed quilt, I wanted to start there. But quilting is actually a technique that's been used for centuries. And early Mongolian warriors would use it to actually warm them up under their armaments. So it was actually used in battle. Quilting's quite a dexterous, tough material.
What I had been doing was intuitive piecing,
Yeah.
and I had learned how to do that. And everything was always in squares and rectangles. I wanted to try triangles.
Oh, yeah.
So everything's a triangle in there. And I started putting those pieces together, and then I started laying them out, and I decided, boring, too busy. So I put it up on my design wall, and so suddenly thought, I got this beautiful piece of blue silk that is absolutely gorgeous piece of blue silk. And then I started just playing it together, and that's how it all came together. Then when I quilted it, I'd already had the ribbon quilted. So I didn't quilt that on the actual thing. I don't think. And then I took then when I decided to quilt the whole thing, I put really close stitching close to the ribbon, and it got further and further away to give it more depth and stuff. So it's been so long ago, I don't remember exactly how I did it.
It's got so many dimensions in it, you know, like I think there's the dimension of time and, you know, I think one of the, you know, so it's really, like when you talk about how you put that together, that's amazing to think about.
And I was thinking of ice and cracked ice and cold but it just looked so chaotic, I had to do something to it.
It's called the Eye of the Storm.